Well, welcome. Thank you very much for all being out here. It's wonderful to see you. And I do want to reiterate that this is a two-part address today. Today in the afternoon, we're talking about volunteerism, and I see that as a base and foundation for everything that we do in our democratic society. We have some issues that are of deep importance to our residents as well as friends of Cupertino, so we invite you to be here in the evening as well at 6 o'clock. I want to thank the Rotary and Chamber of Commerce for providing such a great backdrop to all of these items. In the end, I would wish that everything that we are talking about today gets cycled through in its entirety if it gets replayed, say on our city channel or archived on the internet, because I think the issues that they set up are just so salient and so well put, and also melds quite nicely with what I'm going to be delivering in terms of the rest of the speech, that it is a cohesive unit. So thank you very much for everyone coming out today, and I look forward to being able to engage with you. We're in a roundtable format tonight, or this afternoon I should say, because of the fact that this is the Rotary Luncheon. Rotarians know that this is an extremely conducive type of format for discussion. We're going to keep this format tonight and hopefully be able to have those types of follow-on discussions as well. So, good afternoon, dignitaries, community leaders, and esteemed public safety officers. Thank you all for attending this year's Cupertino State of the City. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us here today in Cupertino. Before I move into my speech, I'd like to introduce again my colleagues on the Cupertino City Council. Vice Mayor Rod Sinks. Councilmember Barry Chang. Councilmember Savita Vaidyanathan. And Councilmember Stephen Scharf. I'd also like to acknowledge our executive staff members, starting with our city manager, David Brandt, our city attorney, Randy Hom, our assistant city manager and community development director, Artie Shrivastava, our Director of Public Works, Tim Borden. Our Administrative Services Director, all the way in the back, Christina Alfaro. And two of our newest hires on our executive team, our Innovation and Technology Director, Bill Mitchell. And our Recreation and Community Services Director, Jeff Milkus, which thank you. I think Jeff was unable to join us today due to traveling and for personal reasons. But let's give them all a big hand for all the work that they do. Today's speech, as most of you are aware, will be focused on volunteering, in this luncheon that is. But as we discuss this topic, I also want to highlight service, particularly service to our Cupertino community. I want to thank particularly our public service and safety officers for everything that you do. It was with a great sense of poignancy that I heard the stories today, and with a sense of pride that I was able to present the certificates on behalf of the city of Cupertino. We realize and appreciate that the work that you do essentially creates a foundation as well for our community. So thanks very much, and we do look forward to working with you far into the future. But with respect to our city staff, I want to talk about a gentleman who has worked for Cupertino since 1973. We're extremely lucky to have an employee by the name of Manny Berrigan. He was born here in Cupertino and raised in Cupertino as well, when this area was still the Valley of Heart's Delight, with orchards for as long as the eye could see. But Manny is also, as I said, the longest standing employee with the city of Cupertino. Let's learn a little bit more about Manny and of Cupertino's past.
When it was all valley, apricots, prunes, cherries, strawberries, in order for you to get home, because it was so dark you couldn't see, you had to follow the North Star. Once you follow the North Star, it'll take you to your home. But at the same token, as you're walking, following the North Star, you got to make one step to the right, and every 100 feet count, and then keep on going, go there, and that will take you straight to your home. Okay, one time they had the Ringling Brothers come, and on Finch Road, on Finch, not by where the school's up, but the other side they had the two back lots, big lots, and they staked the elephants on the right foot down with a big rope. One of them got loose, and when one got loose, everybody started going, all the elephants started going. So we had to go and ring them up and put them in one corner or in the middle. So we got one truck coming this way and one truck coming the other way and the other one coming this way, and blew our horns, and they all came together and didn't even move. The thing that I like about Mr. Lee is his experience, knowledge, and wisdom. He taught me a lot. And my job, he taught me a lot how to do my job and do it perfect, you know. And Mr. Lee is very bright, very smart, and he helps people. He likes to help people. He's very good at what he does. I see we had a lot of people doing his position, but he's the best person for that position. He gets things done, and he cares for people.
Manny is with us here today. Manny, would you please stand? Manny is a dedicated employee who cares about this community and knows quite a bit about what happens in Cupertino that doesn't necessarily make the news by virtue of his job. He's an environmental inspector these days. But really, have a conversation with Manny sometime. You'll hear other fascinating stories besides stories of escaped elephants. Let's give Manny another big round of applause. It's well-deserved and well-served, sir. Some of you may be wondering who this Mr. Lee, who Manny mentions, is. He is our Assistant Director of Public Works, Roger Lee. Roger, will you please stand? Not only is Roger obviously respected by Manny and members of staff, he is also the 2017 National Outstanding Superintendent of the Year, which was awarded by the Maintenance Superintendents Association. Let's please give Roger a hand. I'm pleased to stand here today and tell you that our city is in great financial health. Our budget is balanced, we have healthy reserves, and the future looks bright. And our future looks bright in another way. Service in support of others, particularly the service provided in the absence of compensation, is the topic of today's lunchtime address. And I was particularly happy to be contacted by a Monte Vista High School graduate from 2009, earlier this month, in fact. And he said to me, you know, after I graduated from high school, I enlisted in the Army. Eventually became an Army captain, and in the fall, I'll be attending the University of Michigan Business School. I'd like to spend the next 6 months of my life volunteering in some capacity. And I thought, well, this is great. I'm actually writing a speech about volunteering. This is a nice synergy. And Captain Amaya Gampool was the person who led us in the Pledge of Allegiance today. So Amaya, if you would please stand and be recognized. Thank you for your service. And thank you for your willingness to volunteer. And it's actually this connection between service in the military and service and volunteering that I'll be making at the luncheon today. We have a dedicated and deep core of volunteers in Cupertino. I would even go so far as to say that this is the key to our success. And certainly it is the cornerstone of the health of our system of governance. Why volunteerism? Well, from an historical perspective, the willingness to give of oneself was set in contrast to the compulsion to do a certain thing, with that certain thing being conscription in the king's army. In these more peaceful and enlightened times, it may seem a bit vulgar, but volunteering was originally set in contrast to being forced into fighting for one's king. And I describe our times as more peaceful and enlightened, truly without irony. We do indeed live in a world of greater possibilities and understandings, more so than in any other time in the history of people. Of course, these privileges come with a great deal of details, a fair bit of history, and what seems at times to be a truly irresolvable tension between what people want to do and the restrictions placed upon them based upon various other factors. And that's where the harmony and the spirit of modern volunteerism helps us. Because it is through our activities and commitments to present-day volunteerism that we extend our compassion. But of course, compassion in a vacuum, in the absence of what some think of as real work, isn't necessarily all that effective. For some time, thinking about these remarks, I personally have struggled with the notion that some volunteer and some are paid to do what they do. How do we reconcile this? And I've arrived at the understanding that there's a bit of a need for both in every one of us in this society. You have to pay the bills, and you have to recognize that the aggregation of resources for one's personal use has to take place within a common understanding that no one person can possibly ever do everything that is needed to achieve what we're trying to achieve in a free and open democratic society. It is contingent upon each and every one of us to carry the burden, but it's not truly a burden, is it? We have fashioned it in a manner that we can think about participation and what we like to do and act accordingly. And I will put in a bit of an aside here. One of the very heavy values of Cupertino is educational. I want to thank the representatives from our school boards here today, as well as from the Fremont Union High School District, the Cupertino Union School District. And I think that in the context of another way of giving back, I'd really like to encourage people to reach out to our local educational foundations and see what you can give of your resources in that regard. But thank you very much for your presence here today and support. But there in our society will always be needs that are unfulfilled. And for that matter, in every society. And it seems that our solution, though, to the extent that we have one, is to pay people to occupy those spaces where things like volunteerism doesn't satisfy all of our requirements. But I think that we can do better than that. And if we desire to do so, then what we have all found as effective volunteers is that you do the work that needs to be done. I realize that in this room, probably everybody sits on an average of 2.5 volunteer board seats. I get that. As for myself, in the professional context, my industry, in the professional practice of the law, is particularly guilty of finding ways to deflect accountability from itself on an individual basis. And that's what makes dealing with lawyers aggravating and working with them fairly soul-draining. I freely admit it, although I do what I can to remedy the issue. And on the other hand, this is the group that needs most to understand what I'm trying to convey here. We are a democratic system, not under the rule of a particular person or a particular group of people, but under rule of law. We all need to volunteer time and effort in order to realize this achievable ideal. In a sense, we are still engaged in a fight when we volunteer. We are fighting for a way of life. But instead of being compelled to do something or even manipulated into it, we are asking ourselves how to pursue our interests and give freely of our time and energy for the betterment not just of ourselves, but of those around us. Our efforts are set against a backdrop of a world where the baser motivations still abound. And it always seems they will always abound. But what are those baser motivations really? Aren't they ultimately also products of their context and largely results of allowances under an uncritical eye? We live through a rapidly responding time right now where some of the less savory aspects of our social niceties, and some would say, yes, our hypocrisies, are clearly being exposed. Can we turn this into something permanently useful? I voluntarily give of my time to try to reconcile how we can take this energy and will to do something more fair and more kind and proceed successfully. And I keep arriving at all of the good points of our ideals and how much work and involvement they require. What are the liberties and the pursuits of happiness that we want to protect? Here in Cupertino, from Rotary Club to West Valley Community Services, from the Lions Clubs to the WAFU School of Ikebana, from our sister city committees and our many friendship city committees to our educational and religious organizations, we have a broad array of interests being represented through what is essentially that seed of a tree of knowledge that has as its profound wisdom the understanding of how we go about having all of these things that our social charter promises. It is contingent upon all of us. And again, I know that every single one of us in this room realizes that. I know that's a lot of pressure as well to put on people, and I have in the past placed an even greater amount of pressure upon our emerging generation. I actually ran in Cupertino in 2009 before getting elected in 2014. And I'm so pleased to see the Monte Vista class of 2009 rising up to the challenge of our generation, of volunteering. I see a number of high school students from that time. And I think that it's a tremendous burden, it's a tremendous responsibility, but it's also one that can be discharged, I'm convinced. We need to help this emerging generation. Perhaps the best coping mechanism is a redirection of the energies that are causing our stresses. Look at this beautiful flower arrangement here. It was contributed by a nonprofit organization here in Cupertino that has for years put on a wonderful show demonstrating flower arrangements of an ancient art from Japan. Here is an example of taking one's energies and using them to de-stress and put forward something beautiful to the world. This was brought forth, by the way, by the WAFU Ikebana Society. And these arrangements were made by their president, Fusako Hoirup, who I believe is with us today. Fusako, if you could be acknowledged. Thank you very much. This volunteer organization will have its biennial flower show right here in the Quinlan Community Center on the weekend of March 3rd and March 4th. And make note of this because normally they have it in the fall. They're bringing it forward to the spring this year. We are in an extraordinary society and community. I'd like to share how I've arrived at this point today, which I have to profess, again, is more of a thank you to you than it is an exhortation. As I'm well aware, again, that this is an audience of the concerned and the involved. Although I do have a request at the end of my luncheon remarks today. I moved into Cupertino in 2005, and I decided very shortly thereafter to become engaged civically. I see right in front of me a friend of mine, Peter Leroy Munoz from Gilroy, council member, and I didn't realize you would be here today, Peter, but Peter was actually there right in Cupertino in my office when I first moved here about 12 years ago. So it's an interesting note how these coincidences occur. But although I am a graduate of both Harvard College and, as well as Peter, a graduate of Harvard Law School, it never really occurred to me to become involved with a political office until moving here. But that doesn't tell you a truly complete story. I will tell you a more complete story now. I'm glad that my parents are able to attend here today from Kansas, and my brother Wesley all the way from New York. Thank you for making it out here today. One of my roommates from college, Dr. Mike Ho, is here as well, and he brought his child Joanna and their child Maverick, traveling in from Los Angeles, and I really appreciate it. Thank you for being out here. But on to the promised more complete personal story. Well, in 1949, during the Chinese Civil War, my grandparents on both sides were part of the group of people who fled to Taiwan. My mother's father was the Republic of China's first Minister of Finance under the government that began in 1949. Taiwan is a fascinating place, and I also want to personally thank Director General Joseph Ma of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office for being here today. In the past 400 years, there have been waves of migration from China to Taiwan, and if you want to call it such, leadership that has ranged from the Dutch to the Japanese, and then again from China. Under that backdrop, you also have people in Taiwan right now who would assert a separate national and governmental identity. It is probably, when you really cut through all the other smoke, the most consequential political question of our generation, insofar as having repercussions that are felt throughout the world in terms of whither China, whither Taiwan. Myself, I think we have a lot of common aims. And I'd like to see what everyone else would like to see: prosperity, freedom, enlightenment, elevation, inspiration, and the betterment of all. Of course, how we define these improvements, and in some fashion, under what banner we proceed, seem to be issues that trip us up at times. But what I do know is this: determination, integrity, and yes, both wisdom and intelligence are common factors that seem to lead to larger success. My father's people ended up in the southern tip of the island, in a city called Kaohsiung. We are from a Chinese stock known for its mountains and the size of its people in the Shandong province. And something genetically has triggered in me recently, and I find myself eating a lot of raw garlic. I think. In any event, my father's people were in the Navy. And so my brother and I were brought up in the 1970s and the 1980s in the American Midwest under a bit of a militaristic mindset. But in Taiwan in the 1950s, the times were very lean. They called for frugality and sacrifice, and they required people who would not misdirect funds in order to provide an economic base for recovery and entrance into a modern world and economy. My mother's father, in his capacity, was tasked with ensuring that economic base, and half a century later, we as a world would see China use that economic template to present what we now have yet another 3 decades later. I see it as an opportunity, and I know that others look at systems and history and feel mistrust and more. From a relatively unprivileged background, my father moved to Taipei on his own when he was very young and lived in a high school that had no dormitories. A kindly janitor would see him and perhaps look the other way as the kid with no place to sleep and a few hundred miles from home, at a time when rails and cars were still not all that prevalent, was resting at night on the classroom floor, the half of his body exposed to the elements, covered in mosquito bites. It does a bit of a disservice to speak of such experiences and sacrifices in terms of whether such people are proud of you. But in any event, my point is this: we all come from somewhere, and each of us has a similar type of story on some level at some point in their histories. My father gained entrance to the National Taiwan University, and he met my father after starting Taipei's first school to teach people the test of English as a foreign language. And yes, there are sacrifices and successes in every good story. It's the question of how to think about those sacrifices and successes and formulate those into a process that sustains and improves our common lot that we are here to consider today. The answers are not always clear-cut, but like Manny mentioned, a true north direction can emerge that ensures that we all benefit. And I think it's fascinating that you mentioned the North Star. We actually had an eclipse early this morning that I hope that at least some got to see. It was quite a fascinating sight. I was jogging out along Homestead and just seeing random people standing and staring up at the sky. But I think that direction where we can get to that better place is found in volunteering. You don't need a membership card. Find time to give of your knowledge and experience freely, without expectation of return. We really, truly need this kind of ethos in order to prevent a slew of ills that we have seen of late, and I would suppose people have always seen. Profiteering in manners that have absolutely no connection to the underlying value being delivered is an activity that is much less likely to be conceived and implemented in a community of people imbued with, in the first instance, the spirit represented by those who volunteer. And I'm not presuming to peddle it as a panacea for all that ails us, but it's easier to envision people adopting a better baseline for kindness and fairness if they, for instance, take time to provide food to the hungry and shelter to those who somehow live without it. As well, I would hope that our volunteering efforts, especially here in the Valley, are based upon pragmatic and quantifiable metrics with an eye towards making sure that things, they work. And they have been. Our nonprofit organizations, our individual volunteers, our city's commissioners, emergency response volunteers, faith-based charitable organizations and activities, our library supporters, the senior TV production group, The Better Part, our sister and Friendship City committees, all of these groups and people work in order to ensure at base that our liberties remain abundant and that our freedoms are grounded in the notion that we are all doing this for ourselves and for each other rather than to ourselves and to each other. Now, I'd like to present some videos of a few volunteer organizations in our community. Please note that these are but 3 among many, and that these few minutes that we have are truly not sufficient to tell you about the many efforts and opportunities Cupertino has for people who would like to spend time not just making our community better, but making our society work. But more about how we can put forth the broader scope of volunteering in a moment. Right now, here are some of our community's organizations.
West Valley Community Services has been around for almost 45 years, and we provide critical supportive services to low-income and homeless folks living in Cupertino. In addition to providing those critical services, we're a place where Cupertino residents can come to volunteer and give back. They can help in our food pantry, they can help in our front desk, and they make our agency stronger by giving of their time and their talent. RIDE, or Reach Your Destination Easily, launched earlier this year, back in October 2017. For seniors, it will provide a pickup by a volunteer or a paid driver at their home and will take them to locations in and around the West Valley. There are significant discounts for folks who are living in poverty, and a ride can start for as little as 90 cents one way. The best part of being a member of West Valley Community Services is knowing that you're positively impacting the lives of folks who are really struggling financially in our community. And that feels amazing to know that you are playing a role in helping people that are really facing significant financial and home struggles here in the county. But it's also about being part of a strong community, a caring community. If you want to get involved with West Valley Community Services, the first step is to check out our website, www.wvcommunityservices.org. There you'll learn more about what we do and a variety of different volunteer opportunities we have available throughout the year. We have one-time volunteer opportunities through our back-to-school clothing program or our holiday gift program, and we have ongoing volunteer opportunities as well. If folks have time weekly or monthly, they can come in and help staff our pantry, help pick up food from the community to bring back to our food pantry, or sort through items, work at our reception desk, or help in the back office. There's lots of opportunities, whether you have a little bit of time or a lot of time. We depend upon volunteers to make West Valley Community Services happen. Each week, we have over 160 volunteer shifts, and each year our volunteers complete around 17,000 to 18,000 hours of volunteer service.
Well, our organization is the oldest service club in Cupertino, and we've actually been in business here since 1951. And over the years, we've had developed some annual activities. So the main one, the biggest one, which we do every spring, is a fish-a-thon for blind, handicapped people. We do it in conjunction with the Stevens Creek Quarry, and we service well over 100 handicapped and blind people. They come fish, and then they get lunch, and then make a nice day of it. And just thinking about and seeing how happy and excited the children and the handicapped people were when they reeled in a fish, and then we take a big picture of them and give it to them, and so that's probably the highlight memory of the year. And then we also sponsor $12,000 a year in scholarships to the local high schools. We provide vision care and eyeglasses for needy people. We just recently sponsored the wrestling tournament at Cupertino High School, and other things. We donate money to various local organizations, the WVCS and the Cupertino Quota Club, and a few other things. And the best part is being able to have a nice, friendly group of people to work with to accomplish these things.
The primary mission of the Cupertino De Anza Lions is to serve the needs of our community, Cupertino, wherever those needs might take us. This is projects like Cupertino's Via West for disadvantaged children, providing food for families that are hardship families in our school district, providing comfort blankets for children in hospitals, hosting contests for local high school student speakers, helping students grow in leadership and community service by sponsoring Leo clubs, providing eye exams and glasses for needy students, providing free public diabetes screenings in the community. In August, we hosted Ride for Diabetes at De Anza College. It's a first-year cycling event benefiting the great diabetes programs of Lions Clubs International and the American Diabetes Association. Programs that help those with diabetes, prevention programs, and research to find a cure. It's a disease that touches nearly every family. I was really taken by the outpouring of community support that we receive from Cupertino businesses and organizations like Ridge Vineyards, the YMCA, Walk by Cupertino, and from Cupertino residents, 135 community volunteers who work the event in support of this great cause. There's a lot of satisfaction in helping others and experiencing the joy of the people that our service touches. De Anza Lions is a lot of fun. We have fun people, we get fun projects, fun fundraisers, fun fellowship. It's a really great organization to be a part of.
So the Lions Clubs and WVCS put forward some wonderful efforts, don't they? Let's give them all a hand. We have a wide variety of volunteer organizations here in Cupertino. Speaking to an audience comprised of a good number of Rotarians and chamber members, I know there's a deep-seated understanding of the power of volunteering here. And can you imagine what would happen to our purposes if the people who support all of the community's volunteer efforts suddenly all said, well, this just doesn't make any sense at all. Why don't I just spend more time doing things that are more lucrative? You'd have a society that is much worse off. The very notion of people giving freely of their time in order to address issues in our community is the very essence of the viability of a free society. So please, let's all keep that in mind as we continue our discussions over rights, liberties, and freedoms. Our ability to discharge these great principles do not have to, by definition, require that we impinge upon the rights, liberties, and freedoms of others, and in fact, can instead be directed towards making sure that we get done what needs to get done in order for more people to be provided our knowledge, basic resources, spiritual sustenance, interactive and international bonds, emergency services, books and modern media, performing arts, the chance to interact in an environment that lets us explore our various artistic, scientific, and creative passions, and much, much more. We are so much more than a collection of opportunists. I arrived on City Council as the immediately past president of the Cupertino Chamber of Commerce. In my tenure with that organization, I came to realize that our country's 501c6 nonprofits, which are explicitly in existence on a legal basis to lobby their respective jurisdictions for the benefit of the business community, do not exist in an independent vacuum, irrespective of the well-being of any other given part of the community. In a sense, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. But looked upon from another perspective, the point is that lobbying for a specific good has ramifications that are affected by, as well as affect, actions that can help everyone. More often than not, the win-win situations are created by people finding them and doing a great deal of quiet and unrewarding work. You know, I read a very interesting article the other day about the college football championship, which happened a couple of weeks ago, among its other points, it stated that the greatest coach in history is almost undoubtedly someone that you have never heard of. It was someone who lacked resources or achieved amazing and ingenious results from a starting point that had no business getting to where it got, but who also didn't get to have the most Division I championships in history. The point I got out of it was that we all need to find something to do which we do just for the sake of it and because we enjoy it. And also because we know that what we do helps someone learn how to overcome obstacles, helps someone do any number of other things, thrive economically, exist. I stand here telling you about the state of Cupertino in 2018 through the lens of the phenomenon of volunteering. And I want to take this opportunity to mention that our Cupertino Chamber of Commerce was founded in 1954. We in Cupertino exist as a city because the membership of the Chamber of Commerce was actually willing to do a bit of, and I know this is going to give a lot of people in my industry some real heartburn, free legal work in order to get the city of Cupertino incorporated a year later in 1955. I actually received an email out of the blue from a gentleman named Boris Stanley, that attorney whose office was in the back of the butcher shop on the northeast corner of what is now De Anza Boulevard and Stevens Creek Boulevard. Just think about that. Some 60-odd years ago, a young lawyer who had delayed post-secondary schooling because his generation fought the last great conflict, the one that was supposed to end all conflicts, decided after getting through Stanford and through law school to give freely of his time and get our city legally started. And so I tell you today that the idea that we don't look back, I understand it, but at the same time, I've come to realize that sometimes, in some contexts, we should and we need to look back to figure out where it is that we can be going and how we got to where we are now and why we got here and what it is that we're trying to do. My friends, we can have it all. We do have it all. We can, and we have built a wall of fantastic proportions and insurmountable construction, but it hasn't cost us billions of dollars and the goodwill of our neighbors. It has cost us only what amounts to our volunteer time. And through doing so, we have built a community that shines as a beacon of light throughout the world, attracting people from all over, seeking to participate in what we value. Don't believe me? I refer you to my colleague 2018 Chamber President's presentation regarding housing values a little bit earlier during this luncheon. And that first exhibit would be a chart showing the trend of home values in our community these past several years. Exhibit 2 would be the fact that we are home to Apple Inc. But I need to be careful because collateral opportunism and expectation of gain are not the things that define success. Along with my colleagues on the Cupertino City Council, we dedicate a lot of time listening to a lot of community sentiment that is most certainly not on its face some kind of exercise in back-patting, I assure you. We need that, and while I'd be lying to you if I told you that I love every moment of it, there is a sort of enjoyment in engaging with this type of good and effective medicine. The wall that we have built is a defense against impingements upon our liberties, while defining our freedoms in the context of activities that allow us to support what we value. It is as tangible and strong as it is abstract, paradoxically enough. We are smart enough to work through these and reconcile the abstractions and paradoxes to mutual benefit. And having it all is really not the same as having everything. Why do we even need everything? Well, from the perspective of volunteering and connecting with perhaps just a part of what's out there, I will be working this year to bring forth to Cupertino an opportunity for us to showcase and interact with as many of our volunteer organizations that will participate. And so here's my ask. I ask that you outreach to your networks and let them know that Cupertino will be putting forth a volunteer fair in the springtime. Everyone knows, for instance, that the Rotary Club is our college football Alabama. And while it would be interesting to equate giving freely of one's time and efforts to the less than fully healthy effects of running full speed into others, and perhaps to examine the full wisdom of either, let me just say this. We can always be looking at what we're doing, reassess, and find ways to do it better. And so yes, it's true, this organization that has so kindly and graciously over the years hosted at its weekly meeting, Cupertino's State of the City, holds a place of eminence in our community's pantheon of volunteer organizations. We have heard earlier the many activities your members bring forth, and it frankly is quite admirable. I ask for your help in participating in and setting forth to our fair city this volunteer fair in the springtime, before our students break for the summer and our families head out in all directions of the compass. Many will stay, and perhaps a few more, like Captain Gampool, will decide to stay on the basis of the realization that there is much to do in our community that is free and that makes us free. We can carry forth the banner and the spirit of volunteerism to ensure our community's continued strength, freedom, and harmony. And perhaps in closing, a note of levity, some humor might be in order to counterbalance the pithy nature of our topic this noontime. And also, I would like to pay homage to our senior council member, former Mayor Barry Chang, who sometime midterm started to take up an interest in poetry. And weaving together this, and also the notion that we're trying this afternoon to look at our activities, perspectives, and values through the lens of why we volunteer, let me be brave, like Councilmember Chang, and put forth some personally derived poetry now. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. It's true, your metal credit card will eventually rust. Keep up the great work volunteering. Encourage your friends, young and old, with and without, to volunteer. We all depend on it. Tonight, I will be continuing and concluding today's State of the City address with a session on selected issues affecting Cupertino. This evening session, which is open and free to the public, begins at 6:30 p.m. and will take place right here with the doors of the Cupertino room opening at 6 o'clock. I hope to see you there. Thank you very much.